Wow, it's so hard to believe we're 400 episodes in now. It seems like just yesterday when I aired the first episode on August 22nd of 2015. I really want to thank all of you for supporting the show and listening to it the way you have over the years. I really appreciate it. For tonight's show being the 400th episode, I decided to do things a little bit differently, but before we get into that, I want to share a couple of things with you. For those of you who didn't know, I've got a new show that I'm producing called My Paranormal Experience, and on that show, experiencers come on and talk about the paranormal experiences they've had. On tonight's episode of My Paranormal Experience, a guest comes on and talks about a catman sighting she had. She saw a 9 to 10 foot tall catman in Florida. If you'd like to check out My Paranormal Experience, look in the description for tonight's show and you'll find a link to it. The second thing I wanted to talk about is from now on Friday nights, I plan to release new episodes of Dogman Encounters, of course, My Bigfoot Sighting, and My Paranormal Experience. To find out more about My Paranormal Experience, please go to myparaex.com. To find out more about My Bigfoot Sighting, please go to mybigfootsighting.com. Alright, having said that, on tonight's show, I'm not going to interview the eyewitnesses, I'm just going to play them talking about the encounters they've had with dogmen uninterrupted.
Hi there, my name is Scott Matthews. I live in the UK, in the United Kingdom. I'm 48 years old. I'm currently living in Essex, in the UK, about an hour outside of London. I'm originally from Ipswich in Suffolk, and that's in the UK. I was born and raised there as a child. I left there in 2017. My parents at that time, on the two encounters, my dad was a farm worker, working the land around the area and around the family home and the woodland in question. And my mum worked as a carer, and she worked looking after the elderly. So we were all very much sort of outdoorsy types as well. With my dad being on the farm, we would always pack up picnics and things and go and join him in the harvest. And we'd spend many, many hours and days in the woodland as children. And it's somewhere that I still walk now with my dad and our family dog. So they are still in the same house that we grew up in. So the first encounter in question that I experienced was around 1980. I would have been around 7 years old, and it would have been around September, October time. And it was sunny, it was warm for the time of year, and my mum had a friend over called Karen. I remember her name. She doesn't see her now, but I remember at the time she was called Karen, and I believe she worked with her. And it was a Sunday morning, and Karen, my mum's friend, brought over her brother with her called Gary, who was a bit younger than her, but older than us. Me and my brother, who he's 1 year and 2 months older than me, so he would have been around 8 or so at the time in 1980. We would always hang out with Gary if he popped round with my mum's friend Karen. And this particular time on the Sunday morning, we decided to go with Gary into the woodland, which is probably about half a mile maybe from the family home, because we were going to just go and get some chestnuts from the trees, seeing as it was autumn, and they drop in the prickly shells, and then it's great fun as children, and still is today, where you will spend time just finding them on the woodland floor, stand on them, break the casing open and take out the brown treasure of the nuts inside and go from there. So we decided, the three of us, my brother, myself and Gary, decided to go down into the woodland to pick these nuts. So it was mid-morning, probably, I'm guessing it would have been around 11-ish maybe. And we were making our way to the woodland. We took our normal route into the woodland. Everything was fine. It's a woodland that we would always be in, always play in. We knew the route through. There was kind of a clear footpath at the time, which now is grown over. But at the time, there was a sort of a footpath through the trees. And we were making our way into the woodland, talking, chatting. I remember the rays of sun coming through the trees, the autumnal rays just flickering through as we walked. And I love autumn and still do. So it was a special time being in there. So we get good way into the woodland, probably a good quarter of a mile at least. And we just start looking on the forest floor around the chestnut trees for the prickly husks and start collecting the chestnuts. My brother and Gary, they wandered off slightly, not far, still in my view and always were. I could still see them from wherever I was. They were at various other chestnut trees doing their thing and collecting the nuts themselves, and we were all stuffing them in our pockets and trying to find the biggest ones we could. And I was probably about 18 or so feet away from them, maybe a bit more, probably further. And I was focusing on the floor of the woodland, and I heard like a gentle scraping on the tree trunk in front of me of the chestnut tree, and it got my attention. You hear things like that in the wood all the time, but they're normally sort of squirrels, woodpeckers and things make the sort of the noises around the trees and things as well. But mostly the squirrels are scuttling up trunks because you've startled them, and they're scuttling up the tree trunks, and that's when you hear them. But this was like a little bit of a scrape and a stop. And I kind of looked up the tree, but couldn't see anything. And it wasn't until I realized my eyes took me to the bottom of the trunk of the tree. There stood there was just this small creature that I can only describe as jet black. And it reminded me of a bear cub. That's all I can really liken it to. So remember that I was 7 years old. So I'd only been in school a few years, still learning sort of the animals of the world, etc. at that time. And my brain just couldn't register what that creature was in front of me. It's hard to explain, but it was stood at the trunk of the tree. As I looked at the trunk of the tree, it was stood to the left, and it had its arms hugging the tree, for want of a better word. It was kind of hugging the tree trunk, and its legs, back legs, I suppose I say arms, front legs, but let's say arms because it was holding on. The back legs the legs were on the ground, stood in a standing position. And it was hugging the tree, looking at me, but completely motionless, wasn't moving at all. And I think we kind of both startled each other maybe, or we disrupted it walking in. And it was, I got the impression it was trying to get onto higher ground out of the way. So I stared at that. It stared at me, but I couldn't make out many features. I couldn't make out fingers or claws. The arms kind of were almost rounded off at the end, so almost like a bear cub paw. Not much sort of definition to look at, just fur, but really, really jet black, deep fur. And it almost swallowed the detail, if that makes sense, swallowed the detail of the creature. There was definitely a muzzle there, but it was stumpy. And I don't remember the ears being pointy at all, like other people have said of dogmen. The ears were more rounded off, but there was definitely two ears there, kind of teddy bear ears, I guess. I couldn't really make out eyes, more just fur and a muzzle. But I knew this creature was just staring straight at me from the direction of its head. I didn't feel threatened or scared at all. I remember feeling really, oh, wow, what is this? And inquisitive and in awe. I was, I think at the time I was smiling smiling to myself because I was like, wow, hi. When you're 7 years old, I suppose you almost see everything friendly as a friend, maybe. So this little guy to me looked fun, I guess. I looked across to my left at my brother and Gary. They weren't looking over, but I kind of wanted to get their attention, but I didn't want to scare or startle what I'd call the bear cub in front of me. And it wasn't until I started looking back at it, but it had already started the scraping noise again and making its way up the trunk of the chestnut tree. But the funny thing is that I'll always remember the way it went up the tree. It didn't use its arms and legs left, right, so to speak, to go up the tree. It used both the front at the same time, then the back legs latched on to catch up, then the front legs latched up more, then the back legs latched on. So it kind of scalloped its way up, kind of in the same way a caterpillar moves, or its front part moves forward, then its back part catches up. And this is kind of what this creature was doing. And it was a very strange way of going up the tree, but it seemed to work. And he was gone up there in no time, to the point where I couldn't see him in the tree canopy anymore. He disappeared out of eye shot. And I was just so amazed by this and always thought about it for all these years to come. But at the time, I went over to my brother and Gary, and I said to them, did you see that? Did you see the bear cub kind of thing? And because I was the youngest, they mocked me for it at the time. And yeah, a bear cub. You know, we don't have bears roaming the UK. We don't have wolves roaming the UK. So it was something definitely out of the ordinary. And didn't think nothing more of it. Pockets full of chestnuts. Home we went. Got home, and I did mention to my mum and dad, I did say to them, I saw something in the wood. I think, it looked like a bear cub. It was black, and I told them all the details. My mum and dad didn't say, oh, don't be silly. You know, you didn't see anything or anything like that. They tried to just tell me what it could have been. So they believed I'd seen something, but my mum said, do you think it was a badger? Maybe it was a badger. Badgers live underground in badger sets. To my knowledge, they don't climb trees, and they're like a silvery grey with black lines on their face. So they didn't fit the description straight away for me. And I knew it wasn't a badger, but I just kind of nodded, took it. So that was kind of that. There wasn't any major trauma from that at all. At that time, at that point in my life with that encounter, it was more a joyous thing, a fun thing, kind of I wish I could go back in the wood. And when I did, I hoped that I might see the little fella again, but never saw anything like that again. Well, that size anyway, or that cute, if you like. Never saw it again. And we were frequent visitors to that woodland because my dad worked the land around it as a farmer. So that was kind of that closed chapter. And I just thought about it in my own head, I guess. Never thought any more of it. Didn't say anything to anyone. Didn't say anything to school friends because kids can bully and be unkind. So I kept it out of the playground. My brother didn't mention it again. And then we go on to a second encounter. My brother and myself had, this time with a different friend called Jason. This time it was around 1986. I would have been coming up to about 13. I would have been 13 in the October of that year. And this was in the middle, or sort of a good way into our summer school holiday, which lasts about 6 weeks in the UK. It's like our real main long summer holiday. So it was around July, August. I'm thinking more August because of how hot it was. And it was unseasonably hot that summer. Really, really hot, I remember. And my brother would have been at least 14 by then. And we had a friend called Jason who we had befriended as his family had come into the area with a travelling community of construction workers. And they'd all come into the area to build brand new roads and a brand new bridge, which was a huge thing at the time, which connected one half of the town to the other. So you didn't have to travel all the way through town to get to the other side. You just have to go over the river. So that was all built. But his family were there for that. And I think they were with us in the area for about 2 years while all the construction was going on. And they had like a caravan site all constructed and built as like their own construction community. They were 2 fields behind our family home. So we could run across the field to Jason and his sister, and we would always meet them to play out of an evening. Here, they ended up going to our school, so we became very good friends with them. But this day, it was just Jason and my brother Jamie and myself. And like I said, it was a hot day. I don't remember what day it was, but I think it was a weekday. And Jason knocked on our door and asked if we wanted to go out and do something. It was probably around 9 or 10 in the morning. And we jumped at the chance, as we always do. And we packed some crisps. And his idea was we go down to the stream. And we thought, great idea, because it's a hot day. It's a stream in the same woodland that I've just spoken about. It's a stream that's further down. It's on the outskirts of the woodland, a little bit more of a trek through the woodland. It's a shallow stream, but it's great if you want to stick your feet in there and paddle, or if you just want to chill out and relax beside it with a picnic. There's freshwater shrimp in there, so tiny little shrimp that we would always watch and be fascinated by. So we packed up some crisps and a drink, I think, and went to head out. And my mum was there at the time, and she said, "Oh, come back for lunch." I remember she was doing mini pizzas, which we loved, and we thought, yeah, we'd definitely be back for those. So I think we'd arranged to come back probably about 1 o'clock. And my dad, who was working on the land, was working on the farm. He would come back around that time as well, just for lunch, and then head back again. The farm was probably about 3/4 of a mile down the lane that my mum and dad's house is on, and still is. But the farm, it's no longer a working farm as such. It has visitors there because it has some sort of rare breeds on there now. So it's more a petting zoo than a farm these days. But back then, my dad would come back for lunch. So we were planning to join him and my mum. So we headed out and we went into the woodland the same way that we always did, and the same way that we did back in the 1980, the encounter that I mentioned. So we went along the pathway that was there, which is visible. And that takes you deep into the wood and sort of crosses through the wood to the right as you're sort of a good way into it. And then once you get further into the woodland, there was at the time, it's still there, but it's not as steep as I remember it now. I don't know if it's just sunk over time, but there was the other side of the woodland, there was a grassy hill track between the trees and out of the woodland down, which was about probably about 1/4 of a mile long in length for you to walk down before you got to the stream, which was at the bottom. And the stream ran all the way along the edge of the woodland. So it's very picturesque. And we came out of the woodland down onto the grassy hill and made our way down to the stream. So if you turn round, you've got the woodland's edge, but the trees line this grass track down to the stream. So we would walk down and sort of laughing and joking together as you do at that age of like 13, 14. And, life's wonderful, hot sunshine, summer holidays, not a care in the world. Get down to the stream. We all sit down and we're eating the crisps, the potato chips, and having a drink and really having a great time, as three guys our age would be. And we've probably been there, I'd say it would be at least 20 minutes, maybe half an hour we'd been there. And Jason, our friend, we were all sat with maybe side on to the stream. He was sat in the middle of my brother and me, but he was kind of facing more back up the hill that we'd come down. And I can't remember what we're talking about. It's not really important at the time, but he suddenly went quiet, didn't say anything. And we were sort of laughing and joking about things as you do, but he stopped joining in, but he was just staring up the hill, but kind of staring, not lifting his head to look up, but kind of looking under his eyebrows, if you like. When you look somewhere, you don't necessarily want someone to see that you're looking, but you're kind of looking on the sly. And he just said, "Can you see that?" And we both like, "What?" And he was like, "Can you see that up there? Can you see there?" And he stood up and was still looking the same direction. And I stood up with him. My brother stayed sitting down, and he ended up pointing, because I couldn't see what he was talking about. And he ended up pointing with his right arm, it was, because I was to his right. And he pointed his finger, and I couldn't see what he was pointing at. So I lined my chin up with like the top of his arm with his shoulder to try and see. And then all of a sudden, there it was. I could see. It's almost like I was focusing too much on the shadows of the trees on the edge of the woodland. And to the right of the woodland, exactly the same place where we had come out of the woodland to go down this grassy hill, was what I can only describe as a very, very tall figure. But at the time, which is why I probably didn't see it, was almost camouflaged, because the shadows of the trees and the sun, you could easily just look up there and look away and not see it. But it was a very tall figure, and you could make out a head, or the shape of where a head would be, shoulders, arms, which were very long, and a torso. But we could only see down to like probably just below the waist. And then you had, because it was summer, there was brambles and bush and foliage on the woodland floor that had grown up. So we couldn't really see legs. But definitely a figure stood there, completely, again, like my first encounter, this second encounter, motionless again, no movement, almost like whatever that was transfixed by us, but also gave me the impression that it didn't want to be seen, so it didn't move. It stayed still, and that was almost like its power, if you like. That was its strength, that if it stood still, you could miss it out the corner of your eye. I was unnerved straight away, and I could feel my hairs go up on the back of my head slightly, and that cold feeling rush down you. And it was a dread feeling. It wasn't a nice feeling. It wasn't like where you might see someone in the woodland and give them a quick wave because they're passing. It was like this thing, it shouldn't be there. For starters, it was too tall. I remember thinking at the time, is it someone stood on like a fallen tree, on like a fallen tree trunk, to make them look so tall? And I was trying to think, did we pass a big tree trunk when we come out there? Did we? Couldn't remember. My brother got a little bit annoyed with us at the time, I remember, because he couldn't see it and still couldn't. He stood up, he tried to look, he couldn't see it. And he thought we were just playing a prank, basically, and trying to wind him up, which we certainly weren't. So we were unnerved by this, and we stood there looking. It just stayed there, didn't move. There was no turning of the head. at the time couldn't make out any features apart from the obvious arms. The arms, I remember, were really long, to the point where they went down into the undergrowth almost of what covered the legs. So couldn't see hands. But this was probably about a quarter of a mile from where we were, maybe just under. So it was a little way away, and thankfully so at the time. We decided, because we would need to go home that way, we decided to walk behind us. If we turned round with our back to the woodland and looked at the stream, just the other side of the stream was the fields that my dad would work, and they were part of the farm property. So we thought, you know what, we'll make our way over the field, and just across the field there is a railway line and a very shallow railway tunnel. It's not very long once you step into it. It's only probably about 30 foot in length. As soon as you walk into it, it's still light, it's not dark, and you can see straight out the other side. So we thought, you know what, let's walk across the field, let's go up to the railway tunnel, and let's sit there and wait it out a little while, and let's just see if this thing, person, whatever, comes out further. Because if it comes onto the field, we'll then be able to see it, and then we'll be able to judge what to do then and just go the opposite way to where it is. So we walked up to the railway tunnel, and we stood for a little while because we were kind of anxious and the adrenaline was going, and we'd kind of wound ourselves up a bit. And then we sat down and just like, you know, what is that? What was it? What could it be? Why was it so tall? Kind of thing. And we were sat there watching, and we didn't take our eyes off the edge of the woodland by the stream from the tunnel. So we had the whole field to look across, which would give us a heads up if anything did come out. But the fields and woodland did run across to our left slightly, and then that kind of joined up with the railway bank to our left. But we were watching where we'd come out, and all of a sudden, I thought I heard was like a grunt or a very low, short growl, almost like a gargly growl. And it kind of made me look round, nothing there. And I was shushed, my brother Jamie, and I shushed Jason. And I was like, listen. And nothing, didn't hear anything else, just that one grunt, low growl. And Jason didn't hear it, and my brother Jamie didn't hear it. But by that time, my brother was convinced that we were trying to scare him, and he was getting quite angry about it. He was like, what are you saying? If you didn't hear anything, blah, 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 you kind of thing. And I tried to reassure him and say, look, I'm not making this up. We've seen the thing in the woodland there. I just heard that. And I remember at the time, I'm a big Star Wars fan, still am. And I remember at the time, it sounding like a bit like a short, low grunt that Chewbacca would make. And that's kind of what I likened it to in a weird way. But that's why I remember it, of how it kind of sounded. Because it sounded very, for want of a better word, very Wookiee-like. Then I started thinking, if that is the thing from the woodland, has that gone round and got the other side of the tunnel and is trying to scare us or flush us out? Or if it's a person, are they just trying to pretend that they are, I don't know, for want of a better word, some werewolf that they're trying to spook us because it's school holidays or something, and they're bored and they were trying to scare us because it was working. It was just not fun at all. By this time, we were getting scared, and Jason believed me because he'd already seen the figure in the wood up the top of the woodland with me. My brother was scared, I could tell, because he was getting angry, but he hadn't heard the growl and he hadn't seen the figure. So he still didn't know what to think apart from us were, having a wind up and having a joke. So by this time, we decided to stay on the field, leave the tunnel, but head back towards where we'd just come, where the stream is. But instead of going back into the woodland, walk along the field's edge. So the woodland will be on our left and the field is on our right. But also the stream runs all the way between us and the woodland. So if something did try and jump across or try to get to us or cross the stream, we'd have a bit of a heads up because we would hear it and it would have to climb the bank slightly. So we're bound to hear foliage breaking and brambles and bush and things like that. And we thought, well, if we keep going along the field with the wood on our left and the stream in between us, if we keep going about another half a mile maybe, it will take us to a lane. And that same lane takes us, if we went left on it, it would take us all the way back to our family home. If we go right, it takes us up to the farm where my dad works. And we just thought, if we can just get there, we can then get onto the lane, away from the woodland, and run up the farm, find my dad or someone else he works with, and we could get a lift back home in the tractor and the trailer, and we'd be safe because my dad was due to come home for lunch. So that was the plan, and we very cautiously made our way back along the field's edge. We didn't go too close to the woodland. We stayed on the field, but we were heading in the direction of the lane. And we weren't really talking then because we were obviously eyes on the wood and listening out. And we walked along, and by this time was getting on, and we probably should have been home again by then for lunch, I'm not sure. But we were going to chance going up the farm anyway and finding, hopefully, my dad. So we got along the field, and then that takes us into a meadow, and we walked along that, still with the woodland on our left. We come to the end of the meadow, and we finally got to the lane, and we all felt absolute relief. I remember it was like seeing an old faithful friend, just seeing the concrete of the lane and not being too near the trees. And we got out onto the lane, and through all the walking around, I had some gravel and dirt and grit built up in my training shoes. So I sat on the bank, and the wood was probably about 12, 18 foot behind us at this time. And I sat on the bank with my shoe off, and I was smacking it and emptying the bits and bobs out of it. And my brother and Jason were stood looking at the wood, but we were now talking by that time. So I was emptying my shoe, and all of a sudden my brother just shouts at the top of his voice, "It's there! It's there!" And he's just shouting it. And I remember him shouting it twice out of nowhere. And my hair, as soon as he said that, and I knew my brother wouldn't be missing, my hair, I've never felt my hair tighten so much. My hackles went up. It felt like my skin over my skull was going to split because it tensed up so much. And I turned round, still sat on the bank, and to our absolute horror, this thing had followed us. How, I don't know, because we didn't hear a thing. We didn't hear a single twig break. So this thing had followed us through the woodland. Basically, what I can only assume, it must have gone alongside us. And it was now standing against a large tree, which I believe is a chestnut, and it is still there now, I believe. And it was stood there against the tree trunk, about 18 feet away from us. And it was jet black, and you could see the arms, you could see down again to like maybe the torso, just the pelvis. But the branches of the tree were hanging in such a way that it angled its head so that its head was under the branches, so we couldn't see its head at all. That really unnerved me. It absolutely scared the living daylights out of me, to put a polite spin on it. And my brother and Jason, I looked round at them and they started running towards the farm. I had my shoe off. I just got up and I ran. My shoe was in my hand, but I slipped on the gravel. I fell flat on my front on the gravel on the lane. And Jason saw this, heard this, turned round, ran a few steps back, grabbed my arm and just pulled me. And I will never forget, I was just getting pulled along the gravel. And his adrenaline had clearly kicked in because he was like Superman with his strength then. I had to shake free because I couldn't get up and get my footing while he was dragging me. So I had to shake my arm free. I might have said, get off or let me go or something. I can't remember. And I stood up. I still didn't put my shoe on and we ran. And I was watching my brother and he, instead of going all the way up the farm, I'm not sure why we didn't go to the farm. I think in case no one was around, I don't know. But there was an opening on the left that took us into another field, the other side of the lane. And we all just ran into there. This whole thing must have took place from the moment we looked at it to the moment we got into that field. Must have been probably about maybe a minute because we weren't waiting around. I stared at the creature as much as I could because I was just couldn't believe what it was and couldn't make out what it was. But we ran. I remember the adrenaline. I've never felt adrenaline like it. I've never been in a situation like it since, thankfully. But we were running so fast. I remember my groin, my legs were stretching so much that my tops of my legs were hurting because the muscle was stretching, the tendons were stretching, and I could tell we were covering so much ground in like the strides that we were doing, but we weren't stopping. We kept running across this other field, and that took us away from the woodland, and it took us out onto this road, a public road, which vehicles can travel along, but it's like a country road. We got to that. We stopped. We were absolutely out of breath and exhausted. And we were like, what was that? What was it? We just couldn't work it out. And then we walked all the way along this country road, which took us to the main road further up. And that must have been another good half a mile at least. And then because we were too scared to walk back that way or go up the lane to head home, we walked all the way along the main road back. And again, that must have been at least another half a mile, maybe a mile. So we just thought, we're on the road. There's cars going past. We felt like we weren't alone, and that's what we needed. We didn't want to feel like we were on our own, and we felt like if all these cars are coming past, it can't come to us now or follow us. And we got home to the family house, the cottage, just off this main road, and we walked onto the lane and got to our house, and we went in, and my mum was like, God, where have you been? And then she could see that we were like scared and a bit put out. And we said to her, we've just seen something in the wood. We've been followed. We had to come round the main road. And I'll never forget my mum's words. My mum said, I knew something was wrong. And that's what she said. And I always remember her saying that. She said, I knew something was wrong. As soon as she didn't come home, she said, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't a case of just, three boys staying out and losing track of time and missing lunch. My mum knew. We told her our experience, and she was quite angry because she was convinced that because it was school holidays, she thought it was for want of a better word, a man who was like stalking children in the woodland or trying to get his jollies by watching us and trying to spook us, or wanted to take one of us or something like that because it was school holidays. And my mum rang up Jason's mum there and then and said, get the dogs, because they had dogs, we had dogs. She said, get the dogs, meet me round here. And she told Jason's mum what had happened, and they set out with the dogs to go into the woodland to flush out this person. They thought it was a person. I'm under no illusion. It was a thing. It wasn't a person. It was too big, too tall. And they didn't find anything, but I remember telling my mum before she left, I said to her, please don't go. It's too big. It's bigger than a man. I remember saying that to her, and she kind of just looked and kind of frowned a little bit, and they went on their way. They were fueled by their sort of maternal instinct to protect, I guess, and off they went. They come back. They hadn't seen anything, didn't find anything, but they said we'd probably give this man a really good scare with the dogs, sort of thing, because our dogs at the time could be quite vocal. But just thinking back to this thing by the tree, I'm just trying to recall the detail, but again, height-wise, I don't know. I'd say at least 7 foot had to be. I mean, we were in our early teens, so we weren't small. We were getting on in size by then. But I would probably say about 7 foot. Could have been more, but it was unusually tall. Very slim arms, but the arms were there. I couldn't make out hands or fingers. It's almost like it blended in with shadow, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. Couldn't see the face, and I'm partly thankful for that, I guess, but I'm a little bit gutted, a little bit disappointed that I can't recall the face because didn't see the face. But apart from that, it was kind of chest down, because that was the eerie thing about it. The way it wasn't holding the branch was attached to the tree, but it was more of a low hanging branch, and this was summer, so it was all covered in leaves. It was in full bloom, but it had placed itself against the tree trunk in such an eerie way, and it gave me the impression that it was definitely trying to obscure its head, its face. For what reason, I'm not sure. But that's what made it even more eerie. And it didn't feel right. This thing didn't feel right. It didn't feel like, oh, it's just a person messing around. It felt... I remember at the time as well, when I turned around and looked at it, I remember everything being really silent, but I got that whistling in my ears, and I don't know if that was like adrenaline or shock, but it was like a high-pitched whistle in my ears looking at it, which it's almost like that sound you get if you've ever fainted and you come round and you kind of get that first sort of whistle or low hum, or when you're going to faint, that kind of thing, that kind of buzz in your ears where you're hearing almost like tunes out, or it's the last thing to go. So yeah, I mean, shoulders, arms, couldn't make out hands, definite torso, lean, but slim, not loads of muscle definition. Like if it had it, it was completely covered, jet black. But it's really weird to explain, but it's like there was no shards of light on it. It was just jet black. And it almost gave the impression that if there was light shining on it, it would just eat the light because it was that black. It's like light wouldn't be able to like reflect on it or show any detail. It was jet black. But it was just very scary. And we knew that it was wrong. We knew that it shouldn't be there. And I remember at the time, it really, really got to me that we couldn't hear it. Why? We couldn't hear that walking beside us or through the wood. It had to be walking beside us to know where we were going. It couldn't go back up into the woodland because we could have ended up going anywhere. So for it to find us again, it had to stay with us, I think, in my mind. Not even the break of a twig or anything, just nothing. And that's part of the shock. It's like, how did you get there? How did you get there? You know, come on. How did you get there without us knowing, sort of thing? So yeah, those were the two encounters really. But I'm 48 now, and this was, many years ago in the 80 and 86. People have said since, I've spoke to my dad and said to him, working the land. I've said to him a few times, and I asked him a couple of weeks ago, and I did actually say to him, have you ever had any weird experiences while you're working the land? And all he ever says is, not really. That's all he ever says. And I'm like, well, anything. And he's like, not really. but it's never like a no. He just says not really. So it's kind of like, well, maybe you have, but you're not saying, or I don't know. My mum, we got a border collie in 2009, and it must have only been in the first year of having her. My mum was taking her down the lane, so this is fairly recent in the scheme of things. And I remember my mum saying that she got spooked, the border collie, and my mum said a piece of bramble was thrown down and it hit her legs. Well, she said it dropped down from somewhere, but she doesn't know where. And she said it really spooked her and it spooked the dog. And she said that it caught on her leg, the bramble. And my dad spoke to other people who have walked their dogs around the woodland and around tracks around there now, even now. And two people have said, one person said to my dad, he felt like someone tapped him on the shoulder, but no one was there. But I wondered if he'd had something thrown at him, maybe. But also another chap had said to my dad whilst they were out walking, and their dog walkers, so they stopped and have a quick chat, that his dog was on the edge of the woodland and it was just constantly growling. And the guy who owned the dog stood looking at the woodland, and it was a fallen tree trunk, but he couldn't see anything, and he thought his dog was just growling at a rabbit or a squirrel, but his dog was growling at something by the tree trunk, which I believe unnerved him at the time. My dad tells us all these things, but I don't know if he puts much belief into it. So, and I know people have said as well, even up to this very day, that if they go in the woodland for anything, if they wanted some sticks for veg growing or something like that for some supports, some people would go in and get hazelnut sticks because they're very straight. There's some people have said, you feel like you're being watched in there, that kind of thing. Haven't really told anyone about my experiences. My brother and me hardly ever touch on it. And it was about a month ago now, my brother, we were walking down that same woodland with my dad, who's now in his 80s, and our family dog. And we got down to the bottom of the lane where the tree is, the tree that the creature was stood against with its face covered. And out of nowhere, my brother just turned to me and said, "That's the tree." And it really took me aback because he doesn't speak about it. And I just looked, and I looked at the tree, and I looked at him, and I just said, "It is, isn't it? It is." And that's all we said. Nothing else was said. And I kind of thought, wow, that's quite a thing for you to kind of bring that up. But it was almost like an acknowledgement of him sort of saying, "I still remember," even though we don't talk about it. We never told any of our friends, for fear, again, of ridicule. Being teenagers, you could get cast out of a group if they think you're being a bit strange, I suppose, by coming out with stories like that, because not many people will believe things like that, especially in the UK. We don't have large beasts. I mean, we have like beasts of Bodmin Moor, and we have black shuck. They're kind of the two folklore black dogs kind of thing. But again, they're things that people just don't believe and put much belief into. They're just folklore to scare people in most people's minds. I didn't really suffer any, well, I'm not saying I didn't suffer any post-traumatic stress at all. I definitely had and do still have a bit of an irrational fear of the dark, but I'm not sure why, because these two encounters were daytime. But I don't like being left somewhere in the dark on my own. Yeah, I don't know where that's come from. I thought I might outgrow it, but I haven't. And I do remember that kind of fear being around that time of like 13 onwards, which was really strange because I was always fine before that. But I did start having like a recurring dream as well, which was really horrible. And I haven't had it. It probably lasted a couple of years, maybe more, 3 maybe. I'd get it a few times a year, and it would be where my dad would give me his car keys, and I'd have to go out from the family home, and the car was parked up on like a sandy bank by the road, and it would be dusk, and I'd have to go. And back then you didn't have like keys, fobs that you could press to open and close your car. They were literally manual. Put the key in, turn the key, lock it, turn the key, unlock it into the door. And it was in the dream I had to put the key in the door to lock it. And it was at that moment that I put the key in to lock it that these two, what I could only like, and it's like werewolf hands would come out from under the car, thrust out really quick, grab both ankles at the same time and pull me under the car really quickly. But it's always at that moment that I would wake up. And then you'd have that kind of shudder going over you and you'd lay there and didn't dare move for what seemed like forever while you were kind of processing the dream. And we all have that, when you wake up and you've got that horrible cold shudder going over you. But I haven't had that into my adulthood. That kind of faded the dream. But I remember it very, very, very vividly. Yeah, I remember the colour of the car. It was a grass green car. I think it was like a Cortina at the time in the dream, which wasn't the car my dad had at the time. It was just in the dream. So, yeah, and I think just sitting here now, talking to you, I still not 100% convinced that I know what I've seen, but listening to Dogman Encounters radio has definitely given me clarity and definitely made me realise that I'm not alone with what I've seen, and the similarities with what other people have seen is staggering. The detail, the colour, and it just makes me realise that after all these years, I'm not alone out there. I'm like, this is happening. There is weird dogmen out there, and why they're out there, I don't know. How they're out there, I don't know. How many are out there, we don't know. But it's becoming more and more apparent that they are there. But yeah, those are my two encounters.
If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to talk with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. All right, back to the show. Tonight's second guest is Barry. As you'll hear, not only has Barry had a lot of Dogman encounters, he's also had quite a few Sasquatch encounters as well. And speaking of the Bigfoot encounters Barry's had, if you listen to tonight's new episode of My Bigfoot Sighting, you'll be able to listen to Barry talk about several of the Bigfoot encounters he's had over the years. A link for Barry's episode of My Bigfoot Sightings posted in the description for tonight's show.
My name's Barry. I'm from Western Oklahoma. Been here my whole life. I grew up on a dairy farm. We had, of course, the dairy cattle, and we had beef cattle and crops. I'm also a radiation therapist, and I have an oil field service company. And we've had a lot of strange things growing up we never could answer. The first really weird thing that happened, I was about 16. My dad and my cousin were coming down a country road about 10 o'clock at night, and we see this critter run across the road, and we were kind of dumbfounded. And finally my dad said, "Was that a crippled up coyote?" And I said, "No, that was a hyena." And they kept saying it couldn't have been. It couldn't have been. I said, "It had exactly what I've seen at the circus." And we didn't say much about it. And then my dad told a neighbor what we saw. They said, well, the neighbor south of him had seen it 2 or 3 times, and found out another neighbor had seen it, and so on and so forth. There ended up to be about 6 people had seen it. And that's the only time I saw it. But one night I was bottle feeding babies out behind the barn. And of course, it would be the night that all the yard light quit working. And about midway through the feeding, couldn't have been 100 yards north of me, this thing went to doing the hyena laugh. And I dropped everything and ran into the dairy barn, and Dad instantly said, "What's the matter?" I said, "That hyena's out there." It was out there laughing. And he said, "Well, don't go back out." And I said, "Don't worry." So I didn't go back out. And then, it was probably a year later, my mother got a recording of it. But that was the last time we heard or saw anything out of him. He never hurt our dogs or any of the cattle that we know of. So he's never was an issue. He was just lingering around. But my first encounter with a dogman, I wasn't sure what it was. I just left my dad's. We were driving down the highway, and we were crossing a bridge, and this, from the backside of the abutment, this black thing come running out on all fours. At first, I thought it was the neighbor's dog, and then once he got all the way out, I realized, no, this is way bigger than his dog. He was coming after the car I was in. It was a little convertible. And I was sitting there trying to figure out, what is this? And he was just long, flowing hair, just jet black, just shiny, just shined off the headlights of the car. But he was coming towards the car. I mean, I could see what I thought was front legs, but I thought those are arms reaching out. And then I could see one of his hands. That's what I'm going to call it, because it looked like a big raccoon paw, just a big hand. And I punched the car and took off, and I started to turn around to see what it was. Then I thought, I'm in this convertible. This thing would rip right through it. Even on all fours, he was taller than the fender it was a Mustang. And I've got a son that has a Great Dane that's 238 pounds. And this thing was as tall as he is, if not taller, not much, but he was 3 times the width. And I got a little bit of glimpse of his head, and I could see that it was dog-shaped. But at that time, I had no idea what these were. I asked my dad a couple of days later if he'd seen anything strange, big black. He said no. And then a couple of weeks later, the neighbor, which house was right there where I saw the thing, he told my dad, he said, I saw something running up the cow trail up the hill there one day. And he said it was big and it was black. And he said, I have no idea what it was. But that is the only time that we've heard out of that one. And that was in the winter of 2010-11. And I was trying to figure out what that was for several years. And then I had a Bigfoot sighting in 2014. And I've had encounters with them clear back to 83, but this is the first time I got to see one really well. So I started doing a lot of research and met some friends that have been doing a lot of research on Bigfoot. And they told me, when you're out, there's something else you need to watch for. I thought, oh, great. What else is out there? And they said, well, they call it a Dogman. And I said, what? They said, Dogman. And I said, what is it? He said, it's the size of a Bigfoot, but it's got a dog-shaped head. I thought, wow. So I hope I don't run into that. Well, it was about 3 years later. I have this oilfield service company that we run hotshot tools out to drilling locations. And we go all times of the day or night. But I'd been going in this location, and I had a friend told me, he said, there's dogmen on this ranch. And he said, just be careful. It's okay. And I just got off the location, and I stopped to pick up and got out and was taking my boots off and putting on my tennis shoes. And I looked at a tree row to my left, and I saw what I thought was a snout sticking out, a big snout. And I thought, oh, that can't be. And so I knew right where my phone was sitting in the pickup, and I reached in and grabbed it without taking my eyes off of it and just took a picture of it. And I couldn't see it on the phone in the sunlight. So I waited till I got home and thought, see what that was. And I got home and zoomed in, and I could see him. I could see his head, his ears, the nose, the shoulders, this massive, massive chest. And he was standing in these trees. And I looked at after I zoomed back out and looked at this picture of just about how tall these trees were. And they were about 20 feet tall. And he was just about halfway the height of those trees standing there. And I thought, wow, I can't believe that chest was that massive. Looked like a massive bodybuilder, just big barrel chest. That made me pretty nervous every time I went on that place, because most of the time I went at night. But it wasn't long after that I had gone in and was coming back out, and I was looking for tracks along the edge of the road, like I always do, like for deer, and I drove past this one track that I thought, what is that? So I stopped and backed up and looked at it. I thought, wow, that's got 5 big claws on it. And it was getting pretty late. Sun was almost getting ready to go down. And I noticed, it had rained, and this is pretty heavy sandy ground. And, sand will dry out really quick with the winds blowing, and it was blowing about 15 or better. And I got out. I pulled up real close, first of all, and got out and looked at it. And I thought, this is really, really fresh, because the sand mud balls were still wet. I thought, that can't be over 15 minutes, maybe 30 at the most, but closer to 15. And I carried tape measures, and I've carried plaster to make some prints with, to cast them. And all I could do is stand there and take a picture while I'm looking around my shoulders, just keep an eye open for this thing. And I didn't put my tape measure down, and I thought about casting it, but I thought, no, I'll have to sit there after dark. I'm not going to stay around this thing. Because the guy had warned me, said, when there's one there, I guarantee you there's more around. He said, I've seen several together before. So I came home, and I didn't know if it was a Bigfoot or what. I assumed it was a dogman, but it wasn't dog-like. And another thing about the track, it was about 3 inches deep in that sand, and it was the size of my 13 boot, but a little wider. And I jumped on that sand to see how far I could go down in it, and I went about a ½ inch. And this thing sunk way down. It was creepy just to see the width of those claws and how sharp to a point they came. But like I said, I called a couple of people and sent them pictures of that. I said, what did this come from? Is it a Bigfoot or is it a Dogman? I've never seen a Bigfoot track with that kind of claws. And they both said, no, that's Dogman. That's a different type. And it's not your normal dog track. And I've seen the dog track about 30 miles from this place. But this is more like a huge foot with claws. So, needless to say, I kept my eyes open and was aware every time I went in there. Another thing, I several times I'd go in at night. Of course, I was always looking. And one night I was pulling in, and I looked up to my right. He was standing out in front of some trees, and all I could see was mainly just eye shine. And I could kind of faintly see a silhouette. I have very good lights on my pickup. I mean, I could see things for 200 or 300 yards. But he was off to the peripheral just enough that I couldn't make a good, clear outline of him. But I could tell how tall he was. He had to be in the 8 to 10 foot height range. But he stood there and watched me for a little bit. And the closer I got, then he just kind of turned and went to his left. Slowly, he just walked away, and then he would look back at me every once in a while. So that was a little nerve-wracking to start with. You see these huge, huge amber eyes that just glow. But it's only with the lights on them have I seen them glowing like that. The next thing that happened was I was here at home. Well, not my home. I was staying in my camper trailer a quarter mile from where my house was. That's right after we'd had a tornado come through and demolish everything. And that was in December, I believe, of 17. And I was outside. Wasn't any wind. And I heard some dogs fighting to the north a little bit. And all of a sudden, and this is about 10, 11 at night, I hear this howl, this deep moaning howl. I've heard wolves in the wild, and I've heard similar moan howl, but the power on this thing was just incredible. There's one of Vic's shows that they had a recording of one, and it's very, very close to what I heard, except, it was a lot louder and just putting out a lot more power. And I knew immediately that's what it had to be. But after it howled, everything went dead quiet. I mean, there's no cows making any noise, no dogs, no birds, no nothing. It was just dead quiet. And I stayed out about 30 minutes, just to see what it could be. But it stayed quiet that whole time, which made me a little nervous. Well, it made me a lot nervous. And then also, I was living in the RV at the time, and I was sitting in my recliner watching TV, and this was about 11 o'clock at night. And I've got two little schnauzers, and they had gone up into the gooseneck part of the RV and had gone to bed. And all of a sudden, they bailed out of that bed, and they come down that RV from the fifth wheel. They didn't use stairs. They jumped. And they ran and jumped in my lap and was trying to get behind me. And they kept staring back towards the bedroom. And I said, "What's the matter?" And they were just trembling, just scared to death. And about that time, I got this smell come in the trailer. I'd never smelled anything like this. I've smelled Bigfoot before, but the ones that I smelled have more of a kind of a skunk, but a human sweaty odor. And that's the ones that I've usually smelled. But this was like a dog with terrible mange. And then they'd been rolling around in an animal that had been dead for 2 or 3 weeks. It was just rank, just turned your stomach. And I just thought, I don't know what that is, but it might be a Bigfoot, as we have them around here. But it stayed for about 10 minutes, and then the smell went away. And my outside dogs didn't make a peep. They were just dead quiet. And I called a friend the next night and we visit pretty often. He's had Dogman Encounters. And I told him, I said, "Well, I guess I had a Bigfoot visitor last night." I said, "It just didn't smell like what I typically smell." And he said, "What it smelled like?" And I described it to him. And he said, "No, that's Dogman." I said, "You kidding me?" And he said, "Nope." Well, I said, he had to have been standing right outside the trailer. Just, this smell was so strong. And he said, "Well, I hate to tell you, but that's probably what it was." So that made me pretty nervous about going outside at night. But it's just incredible. Once you see these, it makes you a little nervous. Then through that summer, I went back in several times and I would see more of the amber eye shines. And they never would run away. They might kind of get behind a tree, or some of them would stand there for a while, just watch me. But I've never had one run away. And then one night, my hunting buddy was with me. He knew what they were. He'd seen one. And he didn't like me going up there in the middle of the night by myself without any firepower. So he went with me on this one run, and we were through with the location, was coming back out. And I was looking on the left of the road, and he's looking on the right of the road. And also I saw one standing beside a little tree row on this place. It's typically where I've seen most of them is off this one ranch. But this place has these little sand mounds with trees growing out of them, and they're not very big around, 3 to 6 inches, and not real thick. And I told him, I said, there's one over here. He was probably 40 to 50 yards from me. And he was a big one. He was up on 2 legs, and I got a pretty good glimpse of him. He was a tannish brown with black spots, big patches, not just spots. And I had the brakes slow down while he went behind the trees. I said, he's heading south, which is going to run right. He could run right across the road in front of us. But we didn't see him cross. And then my hunting buddy said, there's one over here. And he pointed to another clump of trees. And the way the road was turning, I turned right into those trees, and I stopped. And we sat there for a second waiting to see if anything would move. Well, in front of the trees, there was one laying down on his belly, and he just raised his head up and looked at us. Those big old amber eyes. Once he moved, we could see the silhouette of him. And then all of a sudden, above him was 3 more raised their heads to look at us. And we're not, 30, 40 yards from these things. And again, like I said, I've got these LED light bars on the front of my pickup, and one of them is 1,000,000 lumen. They're both real wide ones, and it's kind of like turning on the sunlight when you turn it on. And we could silhouette them very well. We could see the shape of them, and those were pretty much black. And we were sitting there talking, what we should do. And then from behind to the right of those 3, we saw one coming up that mound. And we were sitting there watching him. Every step he took, he was taking his time, just slow and easy coming up. He just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And he got up beside the other 3. And he was probably almost a head taller. And he looked like he could be 3 to 4 feet wide at the shoulders. And we were sitting there watching these things, and I thought, I reached down and turned on my LED lights that show the floor of my 40-foot trailer. I use it at night to load. And Rick said, why'd you do that? I said, I'm afraid we might get flanked. And, I knew there was at least 1 or 2 more out there. We don't know what happened to them. But we had the 5 in front of us. We don't know if the 2 other ones we saw had circled around and got it with them. But there was enough right there in front of us. And we were watching them just to see what they would do. And I think all we had at that time was 9 millimeters, which, we just make them mad is all we do. We noticed as they were watching us, it was like they were getting angry because their eyes just started squinting. It may have been from the lights. I don't know. But we both had the same feeling that they're getting upset with us. And Rick said, I think we need to go. I said, yeah, you're right. I think we're just upsetting them, really ticking them off. So I just slowly pulled forward, and I left all the lights on because I didn't want them following us. And we had about 4 miles to get off that ranch to get back to the highway. But they didn't follow us. I mean, it hadn't been a problem. Then I went up there one night. We'd had a little rain. And these lease roads on this same ranch, they're pretty wide. And they're sandy, so they're kind of a tannish looking dirt. And I pulled in on this lease going back. I was about 3 to 4 miles back in there. And there was a bend in the lease road that went around this huge cottonwood tree. And it was winter, and it didn't have any leaves, and it didn't have a lot of small branches. It had quite a few big ones. And I was looking the road ahead, and I thought, well, that's a big old mud puddle in the road. And the closer I got, all of a sudden that mud puddle moved. And then I could tell what it was, even through the big branches. They're pretty far apart. And I could tell it was a dogman. It had a big black patch on its chest. I don't know how big he was for sure, but he's bigger than anything I've seen, Bigfoot or Dogman. He looked like he was over 4 feet wide and over 10 feet tall. He was taking up most of my side of the road. And I just stopped, and, he stood there for a good while. And then he just slowly walked over. I didn't see him hop the fence. He was on 2 legs. I didn't see him jump. He just he stepped over it and went into the pasture. And, I went on in, and I came back out real slow, watching for him. It's like I say, I've never seen any of them that were that big. He was just enormous. One day, and this was daytime, I was taking a load out to a location. This was out in the Texas Panhandle, northwest of the town of Canadian. And there's hardly any trees up in that area. It's kind of a flat, rolling hills with some canyons in there, or really deep washes, if you want to call them. And I was going up to there, and I noticed to my right in this pasture what I thought was a mule deer. It's kind of a dark gray, little tan spots on him, but all I could see was the very top of his back. And he was running hard. So he was about 200 yards in front of me. And he didn't jump the fence, he hurdled it. And when he got on top of the fence, I could see what it was. It was a dogman. And he jumped it. Well, I said jump. He hurdled it. It didn't really, not like he come off the ground much. A deer, when they hop a fence, they tuck their front legs. When a dog jumps something, they stretch them out. And that's what he was. He was stretched out, just hurdled that fence. And it was a 6-wire barbed wire fence. They're roughly 4 to 5.5 feet tall. And this is a farm to market road. It's wide. It's used by the wool field. It's big enough for semis to meet, and the speed limit on 75 miles an hour. Well, each ditch is about 30 feet wide. It's a great big wide road. And when that dogman hit, he landed at one spot in the ditch. One more jump, he was in the center of the highway. Next jump was other side of the ditch, and he went over the fence again. And I kept my eye on that spot because I was going to try to calculate how fast he was moving. And I was running 75. I kept it steady. And when I got to that spot where he crossed, I looked to see where he was at. And he was already 200 yards out there. But when I looked, there was 4 more running with him. And I have never seen an animal run this fast. That just made me think he had to have been running 70 to 75 miles an hour. It's just doing the math, because he covered as much ground as I did. And what was amazing, they were in a pasture, and they were kicking up a lot of dirt. They were just throwing it up. And they were heading west just as fast as they could go. Now, the description of him, he was almost the width of I was in a Chevy 1-ton dually, and he was almost the width of the pickup, stretched out, running, and he was over the width. But body-wise, he was probably just a hair shorter than the width of my pickup. But the top of his back came to the top of my fenders on the pickup. And the coloration was similar to this hyena, going back to it. It was real similar to it, except the spots were bigger. But the shape of it wasn't so much like a hyena. To me, the best way to describe the body build was like take a buffalo and downsize him. He had massive, massive shoulders, and it tapered down to smaller hips. You know, it's not as extreme as a buffalo, but that's kind of the description of him. And his head wasn't extremely long from the back of the head to the snout, but it was still probably 16, 18 inches. But this one had a little bit of a Roman nose. I haven't seen any sketches to match his, but there is online. I have found it's a picture of one. I think it's in a museum. They don't call it a Dogman, but it's a skull with a little bit of the hide still on it. And that was the closest thing I've seen to what this one looked like. You know, he had acted like he paid no mind to me, but they were running in wide open country. Just nothing out there. But this also resembles some of those we have seen back on that other ranch. Because we've had glimpses of some of these that had the same coloration. Now, I don't know if they're the same family. We're talking 30 to 40 miles from that ranch that we nicknamed it Dogman Ranch. And I don't know if they could have traveled that distance pretty quick at the speed they're going. And their endurance really seemed great. They could run down a deer in a heartbeat. And it's just, I still can't get over the speed. It just amazed me. Next one was a little creepy, but it was a little neat too. I was going in, not this Dogman Ranch, but probably wasn't 3 miles from it. And I was going into location, and I was taking it slow going down this road because I knew there was a lot of deer and there could be activity in there. And I came up on this one place that I knew there was a old farmhouse on the right. And then it sloped down into a hill and a creek, and there's a couple of barns down in there, and they run cattle on it. So everything was mowed down pretty good. And then there was a stock tank with a windmill that kept water in for the cattle. But I've gone by there several times, you know, mornings and evenings, and we had a lot of deer around that tank. You know, it wasn't anything to see 15 to 20 deer. And so I was just going slow to see if I could see any of the deer. And I looked off to my right, and I noticed about, I don't know, maybe a foot off the ground, these two little silver eyes looked up at me. And, you know, I've never seen a silver eyes. It looked right at me and then kind of raised his head a little bit, or I assumed that's what he was doing. It looked like his head went up. And then he took off and ran behind this big dark thing. And he got behind it, then he peeked back around at me. Well, I was almost stopped at that point, just trying to figure out what he was. And then all of a sudden, the big black thing raised its head up and looked right at me. And they were huge amber eyes. And I thought, I don't need to stop with the little one here. And I was trying to grab my iPhone. I was going to get pictures. And all I did was fumble around, and I threw my iPhone on the floor on the other side of the pickup. And because I was shaking a little bit, but because I wasn't maybe 80 feet from him. And once he raised his head up and looked at me, I could see his head pretty good. And they were both very dark, but it was kind of neat. That's got to be a little one. And I kept on going. very slowly. And when I topped the hill, there was a herd of deer on the other side of that hill, not 75, 80 yards from where the Dogman little one was. I thought, those deer are going to come around the side of that house down that hill, and he's teaching that little one how to hunt. That's what went through my mind. And I messed up his hunt. But they went on, the deer headed that away when I went by. So I don't know what happened. But, it was neat and kind of spooky at the same time, because I don't like to be around anything like that when they've got their little ones around. It's just a little spooky. And up there, there may not be a home with anybody living in it, maybe 5-10 miles. Just like this place we call Dogman Ranch. You drive about 2 miles and you enter that ranch. You're on a dirt road. And then a lease road, I've gone back 13 miles back in there to where I saw this first one standing in a tree row. And the ranch goes farther east. I don't know how far. And I know it goes about 8 miles south. And then it goes north a long ways. It's a big ranch. But these things, I've heard other people tell me about seeing them. Had a saltwater hauler was telling me this alpha on this Dogman Ranch one night would meet him at the cattle guard and follow him all the way back to where he was getting his salt water off this location, which was about 6 miles. He said he followed him in there 6 times that night, but he said he never would come on location. He'd stand off location and wait for him to come out and follow him back to the cattle guard. And he went in the next day and told him, said, either put me on days or I'm quitting. I don't blame him. And he's seen several in there himself. This one shook me up a little bit because he's also a big one. I wouldn't expect to see him where I found this one. I was about 30 or 40 miles southwest of Hobbs, New Mexico, one night delivering tools. And it was on location that they were, I think they were fracking. There's 20 semis running and all the workers and all their pickups and, extra equipment around, forklifts, lots of activity, lots of lights, and got unloaded. And I was taking some tools back, some dirty ones. And, I pulled off the location and I didn't go 100 yards and I saw something come out of the mesquite. The mesquite's not very tall out there, but I saw something coming out of it and I had all my lights on. And at first I thought mule deer. And then I realized, nope, it's another one. And he walked out in front of me and stopped and just looked at me. I was in my Ford F-350, 4-wheel drive dually. They're pretty tall. And he was the width of the pickup. From chest to his backside was the width of that pickup. And what I could see of his tail wasn't very long. But when he turned and looked at me, there was no eye shine. It was coal black eyes. I mean, he was staring right at me, just like he was staring through me. And I was sitting there just amazed, because he wasn't a bit afraid of the pickup and the lights and all the noise and activity going on that whole area that was working on that location and a location next to it. It was like no big deal. And I kept getting closer and closer to him. And I thought, what's this thing going to do? Do I need to stop? And he finally just turned and walked into the mesquites. But not 50 feet behind him, a coyote pops out. Well, I've heard of them following him around, but not this close. And this thing had his nose on the ground, just going back and forth, just sniffing, like he was looking for crumbs. And in fact, I was close enough that I went between them. And I stopped. I rolled down the window. And I just said, "Hey," at the coyote. He just looked up at me and went back down to sniffing and sniffing around the side of the pickup there. And then I went on and I watched him rearview mirror because I had my trailer lights on too. He just went behind me right back after the Dogman. But he's, I've got cattle guard on front with my headlights or the LED light bars on front of it. They're 52 amps, two of them. And if he had walked up to that pickup, he'd have to stretch his neck just a little. He could have set his head on that hood of that pickup. Now I'm 7 miles off a highway, a very desolate part of New Mexico. There's no homes back in there. And these roads are so rough, you're lucky if you can do 5 miles an hour. And I knew the direction he was going, I might cross his path again on the road going out. Because I had to go west just a little bit and then north and then turn back east. And I was just hoping I didn't see him again. I hear people say, well, they'd like to see one. I tell them, no, you really don't want to because you can't unsee once you've seen one. I mean, they're killing machines. I mean, they're built. They're an apex predator. You hear all these stories, people betting who would win, Bigfoot or Dogman, and I wouldn't place a bet on either one of them. Because the sizes I've seen on both these things is incredible. This thing looks, the one up I saw on the Lease Road, it was so big. He looked like he could just turn over a pickup without any trouble. Just move it out of the way. You just can't explain the chests on these things. Or the ones I've seen in this area. And I think there's really two types up there that I know of. There might be a third one, but because I have seen, I went to a location. The fact it was the same one where I saw the 5 run across the road in front of me during the day. I got there and the company man has seen them also back on this, what we call the Dogman Ranch. And he come running out. He said, I got to tell you something. I said, okay. He said, we had a worker want to take some trash out they've got a big trash trailer. And he went out last night about 12:01 to take some trash to put in it. And he come back in just scared to death. And they said, did you get the trash put in? He said, no, I'm not going back out there either. And he said, well, what happened? What'd you say? And he wouldn't talk about it. Absolutely wouldn't talk about it. And he said, he quit. He didn't come back. And they went out the next morning out the trash and out to the side with these enormous dog-like prints. Just huge. Like I said, my son's got a Great Dane, and they took the pictures and had their foot down by it. That 238-pound Great Dane, not even close to this thing. So we assume he had a Dogman encounter. And but also I'll tell a short story about this company man. He was on the Dogman Ranch, and he liked to go out, kind of look for them. And he was out with, I don't know if it's a friend or another company man, and they found one during the day, walking across the pasture on 2 legs. And he took a whole series of pictures of this thing walking across. And when you first see it, if he's standing still, you wouldn't know it was a Dogman. For the ranchers that have the red cedars on their place, you get one that's 8 or 10 feet tall, and cows like to rub on the bottom of it. Just it'll rub the branches off of them, and so it looks kind of fuzzy once they rub on them, but the bottom is pretty bare. And he took these pictures and showed me. I thought, wow, that looks like evergreens that's been rubbed on. He said, yeah, except this one was walking across the pasture. And he showed me the whole series of pictures of it walking across the pasture. And that would be an easy one to miss. In fact, I would have missed that very same thing. My hunting buddy, Rick, we went on location, and we were going in. Of course, we were looking pretty close. And this is on the south side of this same ranch, about 7-8 miles. And it's pretty rolling in there. You come up over the hills and drop down in the creek bottoms, and, like at 200 yards, you're up and down, up and down. Well, I get down to the bottom, and I see this, not 150 feet from me, looked the same thing that I saw on the company man's picture. It looked like a red cedar. It was gray looking, but it looked like a red cedar where the cows had been rubbing the bottom of it off. And I was starting to stop. And I thought, oh, there's a truck coming behind me. He'll pop top that hill and he'll run over me. So I had to keep going. I said, remember this spot, Rick? And he said, why? I said, I think there was one standing right there, just to the west of those trees. And he said, right here? And I said, yeah. He said, okay. We went in, unloaded, and come back out, and we pulled up there and stopped. Well, that tree was gone. And, and maybe it uprooted and walked off. I don't know, but it wasn't there. And it was probably, I would say that was a juvenile, a big juvenile. It was probably 7 feet. And he had to have his back to us because you didn't see his snout or anything. And so we looked around to see if we could see him anywhere and didn't see anything. So we started taking off, and there were some trees on the side of this hill that had fallen. And there was a ditch there. One had fallen, two had fallen over across. And I'd already gotten up some speed, and Rick started hollering, stop, back up, back up, back up. So I backed up as quick as I could. And he said, it's gone. And I said, what was it? I said, it had to have been Dogman. He said, those trees where they're laying across that ditch, he said, when we came by, it was completely dark in there. And he said, now there's sunlight. There's nothing dark. He said, but what spooked me was on top of the tree that had fallen over, he said, there was 2 big ears, a wide head, just like the upper half of it, like it was just eyes and above the branch of the tree stump. He said, but what was spooky, he said it looked like a Batman costume head. It just was that shape, except big. And that still bothers him. And I mean, there was times that we're being at area were pretty uneasy, and I see a singing Batman's, and he'll just shudder. And I don't blame him. I mean, these things, they're just a little bit unnerving. Like I said, they don't seem to run. Bigfoot will run. These don't run. And it's like they're not afraid of you. So I don't have an explanation of what these things are. I've looked through history, and there's a lot of Indian folklore that talk about them. The Egyptians had the god Anubis, dog-headed soldiers. Is that what they had, or is this just fable? I mean, there's some stories about them, goes back for centuries and centuries. And I don't know like I said, I don't know what they are. I just prefer not to see anymore. But what I do, that's probably highly unlikely, especially there's not any working rigs up in this area like I was going into. I'm sure sometime or another they'll start drilling that area again. We'll be going back in there. And the last 6 months that we had active rigs working in there, I figured up the number of times I went in, and I just figured the nighttime ones, that I was seeing a Dogman one time every 4 trips going in. I can go up there about any time when there's not any rigs and they're hard to find. But if those rigs are around, seem like they kind of hang around. I don't know why. I know the northwestern part of the state has got a lot of these things. I've got a friend I was talking about from Tulsa that he coyote hunts in northwestern part of the state. He's got friends up there, big ranches. And he's had one time. Now, I've been fortunate to be in a pickup. He was out calling in coyotes, sitting on a bucket. And he had used, he's got a range finder. And he gets his range, how his distance is, so he knows how far to shoot. And they'd been sitting there all day, and nothing was happening. He said, we didn't see a rabbit. We didn't hear birds. Just absolute nothing. No cows mooing, nothing. And then he all of a sudden got a glimpse of something. It was up by a fence. And he looked up there through his binoculars, and he said, one hop fence. And he sat there for a second, and he stood up. And he said he looked right at me. And then he said, there's 3 or 4 more, I've forgotten, hopped the fence and stopped with him. And he said, the rest of them wasn't looking at him. He said, that big one's looking right at him. Like he knew, I know where you're at. And he said, I just froze. And he said, then in a few minutes, he said, they all turned and went the opposite direction. And then once the others left, then the big one quit looking at him, dropped down, and took off running. And then he went and got his hunting buddy and said, it's time to go. I used to call coyotes in because we have a lot of problem with coyotes, but I'm really not even interested in calling coyotes anymore, because I've got another guy I know that had the same thing happen. And like they both said, we've got ammunition for coyotes, not something that weighs 800 pounds, 800 to 1,000 pounds. We don't have enough firepower to bring them down. And this one guy, he kind of said the same thing about one he saw running. And he's a long distance range shooter, and he shoots coyotes, a quarter mile away running. And he said, this thing was so fast. He said, I don't know if I could lead him enough to hit him. He said he was that fast. Well, I understand what he meant now, because they're just extremely fast. So people that want to go out looking for these things, I wouldn't. Not walking around. In a car, it's all right. Just don't make them mad. I hadn't had any problem with them, but I'm not going to push the points, especially when they're not afraid of me. And I've got that one-ton pickup, my 40-foot trailer, and all the lights on it, and they don't run. Yeah, they're not much afraid of anything. So if you're out there, be careful. And the caliber of rifle you'd have to carry for these things, I would think, would be pretty good size. Now, I've got a 44 and a 357 and a 45 I carry, but you'd have to hit one just almost straight in the eye to stop it. And I'd be shaking so bad, I don't know if I could even hit them. So just be careful out there. They're out there.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. Again, I can't thank you enough for listening and supporting the show the way you have. Have a great weekend, everyone. Good night.